Welcome back to TechBlog. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a website that's estimated at $900 million. What this website does is it downloads YouTube videos, any YouTube video you want, in any format. So you can see there's a bunch of spam. I got all this garbage. I inputted my last YouTube video and it gives you different formats to download. So I'm going to press download and it's going to take me to this page. So it's going to convert the video and then it's going to allow you to download it. This, first of all, takes a while. It's worth so much money, and this website is super spammy. So a lot of times here, it's going to redirect me to a page that might give me viruses. I don't know what's going to happen. I think the page just froze. But regardless, we're going to make this product, and I'm going to show you what it's going to look like. This is a YouTube downloader tool. It does the exact same thing as the other previous product that I showed you. And when you press download here, okay, great. And the video is downloading. And while it's downloading, we have this nice game that we can play. Okay? Very fun. So it's pretty quick. So this is downloading the highest resolution version of the exact same video that you just saw, and it already started to download. And I'm going to tell you that this is actually much faster than their product. And again, that is worth $900 million. So just showing you something like this is fantastic for you guys. You guys are going to learn programming in a way which actually makes you money. So I'm super excited to show you guys it. It's a little bit complicated, but let's get to it. All right, guys, and we're back. So we're going to go through how the application actually looks from an architecture perspective. So this here, we have the front end. This is what you can see in the application, right? The buttons, the text, and the input text field. So what's going to happen is when the user puts in the URL, the front end, which is React.js, is going to first ask, can I have that YouTube video? And it's going to ask it to our backend. It's not really a backend in the sense of Ruby on Rails having a database and fetching the data itself. It's sort of acting as the middleman between our utility function, which is Python, which is actually fetching the data, and our database, which is Postgres database, and that's actually going to be storing the progress of the video. So first, Ruby on Rails is going to go to Python and say, hey, Python, start fetching the video. And that's going to be our utility function. Python's going to say, okay, great. It's going to begin fetching the video, and it's going to start storing it and uploading the video to our server, which is Heroku. Heroku is going to store that file in the public file of our root directory on the server. And what that means is all we have to do is whenever the video is done, we can simply navigate to the public folder on the server, and the client will be able to download the video from there directly. So from there, Python has a call, so this library that we're using has a callback function while it's downloading. That means that every so often, while it downloads a little bit more, because a video could be very long, right? It's a large file. It could be a gigabyte, multiple gigabytes big. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell the front end, right? We had this loader, and the loader, when we downloaded something, we can see that there's a progress here, right? So that we're not sort of in the dark. And that loader is going to tell us how far along in the progress that we are, right? So essentially what we have to do is Python needs to tell Ruby on Rails, hey, this is the current progress of the application, and it's got to do that every so often. So Python's going to say, hey, here's the progress. It's 20% done. It's going to say that to the backend. Keep in mind, guys, that these one-way arrows are because we're using HTTP requests, which is essentially a one-way or one sort of entity can talk to another entity, but it's like a walkie-talkie. When I'm talking, you're listening, and when I'm listening, you're talking, right? We can't be talking at the same time. There is such thing as a WebSocket where we can both talk at the same time and both listen. So that way it's a more efficient way to communicate data. But in this case, we're doing a one-way data shot because HTTP requests are more common than WebSockets. So WebSockets will be covered in a later video. So the back end is going to say, okay, great, we have this progress. Now, we don't know when the front end is going to ask for the progress, right? Because the way we're going to do it is the front end is going to say every so often, maybe every second or every 2 seconds, going to say, hey, what's the progress of my video? And since that's happening, and we're not using WebSockets, so we can't just say, hey, front end, here's the updated progress. I got it from Python. Or another thing that can happen is a reverse call. So in this case, the front end is always calling the back end. And in terms of a front end back end relationship, the back end can't call the front end unless it's using a webhook, which unfortunately we're not able to implement here. So what's going to happen is the backend, because the front end might call it at any time, is going to store the updated progress in this database. This is the Postgres database, okay? So now all of a sudden the front end is going to say, hey, what's my progress? And the backend is going to say, okay, great. Stored the video progress previously. And when it stored it as a video ID. Once the front end made its original call to the backend, Ruby on Rails is going to respond, here's your unique ID to the front end. So now the front end has this ID and it can request for its video in its current state and request for the updated progress. The reason why is because it can't just request any video because there may be multiple videos being downloaded at a certain time. Keep in mind this is a server and many people could be using the server, more people than you currently. So as a result, there needs to be the way to differentiate my video from Gary's video from Bob's video because we're all using this at the same time. So the front end is going to say, again, it's going to request using that ID. Then the backend is going to take that ID and say, what's the progress of video 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Database is going to go, okay, great. The progress is going to be 20% in this case. And the backend is going to go, fantastic. The progress is 20%. Front end's going to go, awesome. Eventually, at a certain case, the video is going to be done downloading, okay? So periodically, the front end's going to keep asking for the updated progress. That cycle is going to keep occurring. Eventually, Python's going to go, hey, the video is done to Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails is going to go, okay, great. The progress is 100%. It's going to tell Postgres that. It doesn't necessarily have to, but in this case, we are. Now, in the future, the front end's going to say, hey, what's the status of the video 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And Ruby on Rails is going to say, okay, great. The progress is 100%. And React is going to go, okay, great. Now, for my video, in this specific case, there would be a unique, on the server, there would be a unique URL to navigate to, and that URL would then change the page and navigate you to where the video was sitting. In this case, what we're going to do is we are actually going to request the video from the server directly, not even from the backend, right? And the way that we could do that is through whenever you type a certain URL in your browser, you're essentially requesting resources from the server. So in this case, since we know what the ID is, the front end, we've already established previously that there's going to be a certain name structure to the video. The video is going to be named techblog-id.mp4. Okay? So simply, the front end is going to say, give me techblog12345.mp4. And the server is going to go, okay, great. Here's techblog12345.mp4. And now the front end has the video. So that's sort of how everything's going to work. Obviously, how the game is implemented is going to be a little different. That's all in the front end, so that's not going to be handled in this video. In this video, we're just going to go on how the backend architecture works. We're going to build out the Python utility function. We're going to set up all of the endpoints in the backend, and we're going to build the application and just download it directly from the server. In the future, we're going to be able to integrate the front end as well, but since the front end is a little bit separate than everything and quite complicated, and it's going to require a little bit more diving into how React.js works. We're going to do that in part 2. All right, let's get to it, guys. All right, guys, so now we're going to work on the Python code, right? That utility function that actually takes the data from YouTube and updates the backend and says, hey, this is the progress, and eventually puts the finished video in the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a module called PyTube. PyTube is very simple. You can just sort of import it using pip install, and all you need is this code and it's going to download it, which is great. Now, just to look at the callback function, which is going to allow us, so reading documentation is very important because it's going to outline all of the functions that are available. So when we define this sort of YouTube class, when we define an instance of this YouTube class, we have this, if you can see it, this onProgress callback, right? Which means that as the progress gets updated, we're going to update this callback and then an onComplete callback. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, the onProgress callback is going to call Ruby on Rails, which is going to be listening at a certain endpoint for our call. And when it's complete, we're also going to call that, but we're going to call it with progress equal to 100%. So once the progress is equal to 100%, then the backend is going to know that the video is finished. It's going to tell the front end, and the front end is going to take it from the server. Okay, so great. So if we see the documentation, we get two different objects. We get stream, which is going to be an instance of this stream object, and it has a file size, okay, which is great. Now, it also has a file path, but we don't need that. So we're just going to have the yeah, so we're just going to use the stream. Okay, so we're going to go back here. And first, we're going to do a couple imports here. So first, you got to pip install PyTube, but assume that you already installed it. So PyTube import. So YouTube is that class. Oh, YouTube. We're going to import system. Okay. We're going to import time as well. That way, when we're making our request to the backend, we're not overloading the backend by making a request every single millisecond, which is, I believe, how often the callback happens. So we're only going to register or make the call to the backend if a second has passed, which is reasonable. It isn't going to overload our servers. Import requests, import OS. Okay, great. So what we're going to do from here is first we're going to say, okay, this is going to be the initial start time. So time.time. This is going to give us, I believe, the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. But it's only going to, or I believe it's going to be seconds in this case. It's only going to be relevant if it's done sort of relative to another end time, right? Because a million seconds doesn't mean a lot to you, but 3 seconds, which is start time minus end time, does mean something to us. So eventually we're going to define an end time. So URL, we're going to do sys.argv2. So what that's going to be is whenever I issue a command from the terminal, say I issue a command like, this is called YouTube Downloader. So let's say we do, I go Python 3 YouTube downloader.py arg1 arg2. Okay, so this is issued as a system command. Okay, the first argument to the system command is going to be this YouTube downloader.py or Python 3 YouTube downloader.py. The second argument to the system command, right? So argv1, this is going to be a list, is going to be arg1 and then arg2. So essentially, this is a list of strings, and the strings are denoting what file we're calling and the arguments that we're passing to the file, which is convenient to know. And if we use sys.argv, we can access those, which is going to be useful when the backend sort of calls this utility function, and that's how the backend is going to send these arguments to the utility function in our case. And the vid ID is actually going to be generated by the backend, because the backend is sort of the middleman between everything really, between the front end, database, and the utility function. Next thing we're going to do is define an instance of the YouTube class. So YouTube class, we see different parameters. So we're going to define the URL. URL is going to be equal to URL. Now we're going to register the callback. So we can see on progress callback. We're going to do that. On progress callback is going to be equal to progress. We're going to call it progress CB. And on complete callback is going to be equal to complete CB. Now the reason why they're different is because when the video is complete, it might get to a point where the video is 99% done, and instead of calling progress complete with 100% done, it's just going to call the complete callback, which means that theoretically, if you don't use the complete callback, there will never be a way for you to tell the back end, okay, the video is now done, which would tell the front end, and the front end would get it from the server. So we need to make that transparent. Okay, so now we're going to define our callbacks here, which is great. So first thing is we're going to do our progress callback. Okay, so the progress callback is going to get a couple different objects, right? It's going to get, I believe, So stream. So if we go back to our documentation here, so what does it get? It gets a callback that takes stream and file path. Okay. So here we'll get stream, path. Okay. And it's good to document your functions. So we're going to say callback to track the progress of the app. Cool. And the other thing that's cool is in VS Code, when you do that, then we can actually see the description of the function. So if you defined a function a while ago and you labeled it some obscure thing, then you can at least tell yourself, hey, this is what this does. So now we're going to reference, so the callback function is going to be called in the context of this YouTube downloading class, which means that we might not actually have access to arguments like the start, right? So this is technically defined in a global context, but because the progress callback is being called by this YouTube class in a different context, we actually don't have access to it. So the first thing we need to do is use this global start. So we're actually referring to this global start as opposed to a local variable start, because you can have a local variable defined in the progress callback and you can have your global variable, and those things are different. So what we're going to do is we're going to say current, or we could say, end time, but current is going to be time.time. You could say current time. We're just going to call it current, for example. Okay. And now we're going to say, okay, the time elapsed is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to start. Sorry, no, it's not. I tricked you guys again. Wake up. Okay, so current minus start is going to be the time elapsed, okay? Now what we're going to do is, again, we don't want to make this call to the back end every single millisecond because it's going to crash our server and then people aren't going to be using it. That's a denial of service attack for all you hackers out there. And what it's going to do is we're going to say, okay, if the time elapsed, it's going to be in seconds, is greater than 1, so a second has passed, go for it, boy. Okay, so a second has passed, so we're going to say, okay, so percentage downloaded, can't spell. Okay, so what we're going to do is this stream object here, right? So the stream object, it is a instance of this class, and it has the file size. So the total file size of the stream. Also, I believe, yes. So the onProgress callback, the whole time I was looking at the complete callback. The onProgress callback also has bytes remaining, which is very important. Okay. So bytes remaining. Okay. That's great. And that's the way that we're going to actually see, okay, what is the percentage done? Because it's going to give us, okay, the bytes remaining, and it's going to give us the total bytes, which is going to allow us to calculate, okay, what is the percentage that's been downloaded, and we're going to display it as a number. So instead of, say, 0.3, we're actually going to display it as 30, because that's how our front-end component is going to render it. That's what it understands. So bear with me here. So we're going to convert this to a string. I don't want it to be an int. We are going to round. Okay, we're going to have a lot of embedded functions here. Well, actually, sorry. Let's go from the inside out here. So first we're going to do, so we're going to go file size. No. We're going to go stream dot, I believe it's file size. Let's check it. So we have stream object is going to have file size. So it's going to return in bytes. Okay, great. So file size. And then we're going to go minus bytes. Minus bytes remaining. Cool. Now we're going to make this as a float, right? Because these are integers. And if we're going to divide by an integer and we get a number that's below 1, then it's just going to floor to 0, right? So we're going to cast it to a float. We're going to cast both things to floats, which is just good practice. So we're going to go divided by stream. So total file size, right? Okay, great. So now from there, that's going to give us a floating point number, which is a lot of digits. Now, we don't want a lot of digits because that's just going to give us too much precision. We don't need that precision, and our front end doesn't want it. So screw off. Now, so we're going to round it to 2 decimal places. That's what the round function does. And we are going to multiply by 100. Okay, great. That sounds fantastic. And now, just for good measures, we're going to convert that to a string. Okay, fantastic. All right, so next thing. So now we have the percentage downloaded. So what are we going to do this? Well, we're now going to make the request. So we have the AOK to make the request to the backend because it's been a second. So we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go requests. So we could do this in different ways. You can either make a get call or a post call, right? A post call, you can actually be sending more data to the database. And in theory, this should actually be a post call because we are providing data as opposed to getting data, right? Those are 2 different things. So get is I want to get something from you, and post is I want to give something to you. So this is the way that Heroku works. I found when I was debugging it, it was recognizing get calls better. So we're just going to use that as a get call because they can actually be used interchangeably, really. So we're going to be listening now with requests. So we're going to define this is where the backend is going to be listening, okay? So anything to localhost 3001. So this isn't production. On production, we would say, okay, HTTPS. We're actually going to go HTTP because then it doesn't have to verify the authenticity of the SSL request. So this is going to be where the backend is listening. Now, in reality, we would actually be doing techblog.com, but for now, when we're doing development, we're just going to use this. So the URL, which we're actually going to be defining later in this video, but for now, this is what it's going to be called. Update progress. Okay. Now, this is a F string in Python, which means I can actually input variables in here, which is pretty cool. So vid ID, right? ID of the video. We need to tell the backend, hey, which ID video, which video that we're actually updating. Sorry, it's too many words. And then we're going to tell the percentage downloaded. Okay, great. So we don't want to verify the SSL. So we're not even doing a secure HTTPS request, but in the case that it does end up routing it, we don't want to verify it because the certificate isn't going to be valid and then the request call is going to fail. So that's okay. We're just using a local host. All you security nuts out there, relax. And now we're going to update the start time. Okay, right? Because we don't want it to just keep going, right? Because then otherwise, if we don't update it, then time elapsed is always a second since we first ran the app, but it's a second since we last made the call is what we want to do. Okay, great. So that should be good. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to define the complete callback. Complete CB is going to take, what is it going to take? It's going to take a couple of things. It's going to take all my money. No, it's not. Relax. It's going to take stream and file path. So file path is in the case that we wanted to sort of download it to a certain file name, but we're actually going to do that later by another function which also can do that. So we don't need file path. So file path. And actually, in Python, when you don't use a variable, you just declare it as a underscore, or that's sort of good practice in any development stuff. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to document all of our methods. So it calls the endpoint. The final progress 100. HANA. Okay? So we're going to simply do simply do requests.get. So we're going to do an F stream and we're going to go So basically it's this exact same thing, but we're just going to hard code 100. Just one way to do it. Okay. Great. So we got those methods. The other thing that I actually missed, so we can just sort of put it here, just to do our globals before our methods, is actually downloading it, right? So we defined this instance of YT, but we didn't download anything as was defined in the docs. So if we go back to the docs, right, we want to use this. Okay, that's exactly what we want to do. So we're going to go yt.streams. Stream, so this is a stream query. So we're going to be querying YouTube for our certain stream. We're going to, or actually rather, this is going to be querying, the video is going to have different streams, right? It's going to have 720p, it's going to have 1080p. So we're going to query progressive, true. So we're going to go file extension. We want it as an MP4. I'll just standardize things a little bit here. We're going to order by resolution, which means we want to download resolution. Okay, we want to download the highest resolution because, I mean, why not? We can. And our server is going to be pretty fast. Even though we're using a free server with Heroku, if you used your own dedicated Linux server that you paid a billion dollars for, or if you hosted it on a Google Cloud, it'd be much faster. But in this case, I'm cheap, so I use free servers. And we're going to get the best one. Okay? That's great. Now, here, I believe we can actually just download it straight. Right? First.download. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to go .download. And when we download it, we can actually do the output path here. So output path is going to be which folders are we going to navigate through. So when this command is run, this command is going to be run. If we look at sort of my file structure here, this is going to be the same file structure that the server will look like, okay? So we actually want it to be in the public, right? Public means it's accessible when you type in a URL on sort of a web page, right? So in public here, so these are a bunch of videos used for development, right? But like in client, we're also gonna have a public here. So when you navigate to techblog.com, it's actually gonna give you the index.html file, right? This is all accessible to the public, which is why it's called public. So your video is gonna be accessible to the public. And since this isn't a high security application, that might not be best practice, but in this case, it's going to be fine, right? You're not exposing like people's passwords to the public. That would be totally different. So we're going to put it in public so that the front end can download it. And what are we going to call it? Well, we're going to call it, again, we're going to use an F string here. So we're going to say file name, F, and we're going to say techblog, okay? And we're going to go vid ID. And that's it. Okay? So that's all the Python code that we're going to need, right? So first we define the start time. We pass in the variables from the backend. We instantiate, we order, we do our download. This is the progress callback. So if a second has passed, we say update the progress. Eventually the video will be done and we'll say to the backend, hey, a video is done. You can update the database, and when the front end requests it, it's going to request it from the server. And boom, fantastic, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to define these endpoints, right? So this endpoint here, so this tools update progress, this isn't defined, right? The backend has no clue what the heck. If it receives this, it's going to not know what that is. It's going to not know, well, this is actually going to be the same one. So we're going to define all of our endpoints, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to define all of the routes on the Ruby on Rails API. And essentially what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to tell the front-end developers, for example, or an administrator, what, if they request a certain endpoint, right? If you request, say, this endpoint, what data are you going to be receiving in return? And it's sort of like this documentation as well, right? If you sort of call this method or this accessor author, you're going to get a string and it's going to give you the video author. So similarly, we need to tell, first of all, Rails, right? If a certain endpoint is requested, for example, this endpoint right here isn't currently defined. So if it's requested by the front end, or if it's requested by the Python utility function, then Rails needs to know, okay, who is responsible for returning the data, and we're going to define that through the routes. So the first route we're going to define here is the download route. So the download route is going to be defined like this. So first we're going to make first we're going to define the update progress route. This is the route that's actually going to be called by this Python utility function. Okay, so it's going to be a GET request. So we're going to say tools, which is just an arbitrary directory. Update, not upgrade. We're not upgrading anything. Update progress. Okay. Slash ID means we're going to be defining this as a parameter, which is going to be accessible to our tools controller. This tools controller is going to actually return or update the database, in this case, with the progress. And it's going to go to the tools controller. Okay. Tools. And the method it's going to route to is the update progress method. Fantastic. Okay, next one. So, and if we define these all as GET requests, we can actually make them right from the browser because we're not currently building out a front end. So if we can call the Rails API from the server, then it's going to be easy for us to demonstrate the functionality. Also, we're defining relative paths, right, not absolute paths. So in theory, this is going to be calling techblog, so https techblog.com, or in this case, it's actually going to be calling https localhost 3001, which is the port that my development server is going to be running on. So it's nice that we're able to define relative paths because, again, the base path changes, right? Right now it's going to be localhost, but on production it's going to be techblog. Tools.get progress. Next method we're going to define is going to be tools/get video/ID. So this is going to be called by the front end when the get progress method has returned 100, which means that the video is done. And now the front end got the green light to go to the server, right? Go to the public folder, which is accessible to the public, and it's going to ask for an ID. It's going to ask for the video, and we've already established what that video format is going to be. So it knows exactly what to request for because it has the ID. Okay, get video. And the last one is going to actually be the download, right? So we're going to do this as a GET request as well. So get tools download, I guess we should call it download YouTube. We're not downloading all of YouTube. And then URL parameter, it's going to route to tools.download. And if you think about it from a security perspective, guys, this isn't going to be the most secure application in the sense that we're not validating if the requester or the client is actually authorized to get the progress of this specific video. You could implement that through sessions, maybe have some sort of cookie, which you first authenticate that you are part of a session, right? And maybe the backend, the API is going to be always authenticated so that it can sort of make all these requests through the system, but say an external client, right? A malicious external client is trying to get the progress of a video, but in reality, this isn't going to be a security critical system, right? We're not dealing with usernames and passwords, for example. This is an authentication. So as a result, if you see a video which you weren't supposed to see, that's not going to be the end of the world, right? But if you're building out a more secure application, this is not best practices. And honestly, on that other website that we saw, that's worth $900 million. That's not going to be the most secure either, and it's guaranteed because it's super spammy. And just sort of looking into, just out of curiosity, how you would gauge the worth of a website. So I just went on another site here just to sort of cross-reference the worth of the previous site, y2make.com, and how it would be evaluated. So it's saying 12 million US dollars, right? So the reason why it makes so much money or is worth so much money is it receives this many users per day, unique users, okay? So as a result, it's going to be generating money through Google AdSense. Google AdSense is a very, I don't want to say reputable, but it's not going to be as spammy as other sites like Adsera, which are going to send you all these push notifications. They're going to redirect you to pages where you want to play these silly games. And as a result, the reason why they put these as opposed to Google AdSense alone is because they actually pay more. They pay a lot more in some cases. So as a result, if you develop one of these sites, you might want to do that if you just want to make as much money as possible. And similarly, if you look at something like Google AdSense and you say, okay, website like y2mate.com, say that it monthly, it generates more than this monthly, it generates 1 million daily. It already makes annually $1 million, okay? So this is an estimate. And honestly, it's going to be making way more than that because it's not only using Google AdSense, it's also using other things which are more spammy. They pay more per click, and it's also more likely you click on them because these stupid push notifications are very easy to click on. And that's why these websites exist and are built the way they're built. So thank you to all those developers. Don't be like that. I promise it's not worth it, although that is a lot of money. So as a student, it's very tempting indeed. So now what we're going to do is we are in the tools controller. Now the controller in Rails is going to be defining, you get to define all these methods. So it's going to define, okay, how are we going to interact with the database? Ruby on Rails is very well integrated with the database. And I don't want to go too much into database theory, but essentially we're going to have this video table, right? And sort of taking a step back, if we have a database, we might store various tables. One might be a users table. In the users table, it might have various fields. So what data will we collect on a user? We might store the username, the password, the email, first name. And similarly for a video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to store the progress of the video. We might store the URL, so the original requested URL by the client. And we're going to also store the ID as well. Okay, so this is how we're going to build out the application. So first we're going to require secure random. So what's secure random going to do? Super secure, guys, not that secure. But what it's going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to define it's going to pick sort of a hashing function. It's going to pick a random number within a range that we give it. So first we're going to define this sort of ID. And this, if we define it with a @ symbol, it's going to be accessible by all methods within this class. And as a result, it will be used because we're going to actually define another method, which is going to be called by another thread. So we're going to need this syntax. So random number. Okay. Let's just throw in a big number. We don't want any collisions in this hash. So what this means is, okay, it's going to pick a random number within this range. And as a result, this is going to be the maximum number of videos that can be stored on our public folder without them being overwritten, right? So if we had a smaller number than this, say that we had 100, then as soon as you get over 100, you're going to start having collisions, right? Videos are going to be called the same name, and as a result, you might get corrupted videos. You don't know what's going to happen, so it's better to keep it as a big number. Also with Heroku, it's going to be cleaning out these videos periodically anyway, so we will never get to this mark. But it is good practice to delete the video after the user has downloaded it, and also to remove the record from the database because you no longer need it. That is database cleansing, which is important, especially if you have a fixed size database or tables. So now what we're going to do is we're going to define video. And this is the benefit of Rails, is that it integrates seamlessly with a database that you connect to. We're not going to show you how that's done, but this video class is going to be the video table, right? And we want to create a video. So what do we want to define as a field? So the ID of the video is going to be the ID we defined above. We're going to say the URL is going to be params. So this is how the front end is going to pass the parameters in that get endpoint, right? So this get endpoint here, so this URL parameter, and then that's going to tell the tools controller, well, it's going to tell The Rails API, okay, well this after download YouTube, this is going to be the URL parameter. It's going to send that to tools, and tools is going to know, okay, that's the parameter. So the URL is going to be that parameter. Progress, it's 0. We haven't started downloading it, but progress is progress. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to spawn a new thread. Now the reason why we're going to spawn a new thread here is because we actually want to, the system call that we're going to make, so right, if we called sort of Python 3, Python, we called the Python utility function, that call is blocking, which means that the current thread that's executing is going to block until the Python thread is finished, okay? And what that means is that if this is a single threaded application running on Heroku, this is going to block and we're not going to be able to return to the front end what the ID is for it to call for it to periodically call in order to get the updated progress. And as a result as well, if the thread in a single thread is backed up, is blocked, right, because it's running the Python's not going to be able to call another endpoint to talk back to API. So there needs to be one, or at least one, there should be actually multiple threads, sort of listening, and if they do get called by either the API or the client, they can actually respond. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to define other external systems to call the tools controller. Right, and this is, again, example of integration engineering. How do you integrate all these various systems? Do you spawn off different threads? Do you spawn off different processes as well? But sort of inter-process communication is difficult in some cases. How do you standardize ID across various systems? So all these questions. And again, this might not be the most efficient way of doing it. Another way to do it is instead of the client calling the API or Ruby on Rails, and then Ruby on Rails connecting to the database and Python, in theory, the client could just call Python and just say, what is the progress? Then Python could just send it back through a socket that's opened on a certain port. But in this case, we want to stick with HTTP requests because we can debug it using the browser, and most developers are familiar with HTTPS. So that could be, sockets could be a topic for another video. So now we're going to send to the front end, okay, this is your ID. Okay, use this ID in the future. Okay, great. And sorry, I just made a typo here. We're actually going to call a method here. Okay, so the thread, we're going to execute this new thread on this method. And this new thread is going to be, all it's going to do is it's going to call the utility function. So it's going to run a system command. It's going to run Python 3. So it's going to go into the Python folder. If we look at our directory, Python folder is available in the root. So it's going to call YouTube downloader.py. And this is sort of like an F string. So we're going to go with ID, which is going to be available in this method as well because we defined it with the Aeropostale symbol. So params URL. Okay, so we got that going. Great. So Python's called. So we have 3 more methods that we want to define. It's also good just to label these for, say, a front-end developer if they don't understand how things are defined in routes. And in addition, you can define things in your routes as well, because similarly to how we did it with PyTube, where we said, okay, if you call this accessor on this instance of a pytube.youtube class, then you receive a string. So why don't we say something like, just to make sure the front-end developers are happy, right? Updates the progress on the currently downloaded YouTube video of ID, right? So that, again, it's sort of self-explanatory by the endpoint, but just to clarify things. And similarly, you could also do it with these methods as well. We're not going to do it, but you could do it here. It's more likely that the front-end developers are just going to access the routes anyway. So the next one is going to be get video. So this is going to be called by the front end when progress has been equal to 100. The front end knows that, and now it's going to request this get video, which means that the video was ready on the public folder, and it is ready to be requested. So the video is stored in the public folder, and we have to standardize what the video name is going to be. One way to do it, it could be anything, but in this case, we're going to call it Tech Blog. And just to make it unique, we know that the params, so when the front end requests the video, it obviously has to define the ID that it's requesting. And it would know the ID because that's how it's been communicating. So this is going to be the standardized name. So it knows, so the Ruby on Rails knows that the Python utility function saved it as techblog hyphen params ID. So what the ID is, .mp4. So it's just going to send that to the front end whenever it's requested. Okay, great. So now we're going to define the update progress method. Okay, update progress. So we're going to find video. So first we're going to find the video. Okay, the video should exist. If it doesn't exist, then there's an error and we'll return there's an error, but the video should always exist unless there's some sort of fault where maybe Heroku deleted all of our videos as, well actually in this case, that wouldn't happen. But say that the database was somehow corrupted, right? Heroku periodically restarts its databases, so unless you're running it on a, I believe, hobby or higher, then it would not restart your database. So there is a chance that records will be lost. Don't quote me on that, but it does happen. So we're going to find based on the params, but in theory, the video should always be there. Okay? So in the case where this fails, we're going to sort of put it in an if statement. So in theory, this should always return truthy. I don't know if this returns the actual instance of the video, like if it returns what field was updated, or if it just returns a bool, but it will return truthy regardless if this does occur in the way we want it to. So we just render JSON, okay, which is just a 200 status. So in the world of servers, if you render a 200 status, that means that everything's good, it's clear. If you render a 300, like a 302, that means that you're being redirected. If it's a 500, that means a server error. 400 usually means you're unauthorized. 404 error means the item was not found. Just a couple HTTP statuses. A little crash course on that. Took 5 seconds, okay. So we're gonna go video.errors. So we'll tell you what the error is, okay? And here's another status on processable entity. Okay, and that's in the case where we can't process this, update progress failed, didn't work, okay? And end. Okay, fantastic. So this is actually our whole application. And now we can, if we run a server, we can actually do the downloading. We can check to see what the progress is. So we can pretend that we're the front end, and we can make calls to the Rails API and say, okay, what's the progress of the video? What's the progress of the video? What's the progress of the video? So keep asking until we get it as 100. And then once it is 100, we're going to call the get video method, okay? So great. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a Rails server. So Rails S. We're going to start it on port 3001. Oh. Got a quick error. Try that. Okay, great. We have 2 workers here, right? Min threads 5, max threads 5. So there's going to be enough threads to listen to these requests. Okay, great. So one update I wanted to make, guys, is we can't actually request the full absolute path URL here because the path is going to have backslashes, and as a result, Rails is going to think that it's going to add it to this endpoint, and as a result, it's not going to route properly. It's going to recognize the backslashes as backslashes as opposed to sort of a string. So we don't want that to happen. So we're going to update the tools controller. And the tools controller is not just going to call with params URL. Instead of defining the full absolute URL, we're actually just going to define on a certain page, we're going to define the we're going to define the characters after the watch, okay? These characters are going to be unique for every video, and as a result, we can use these and Rails is not going to be confused. So we're going to have to make a couple different arrangements here. So all we're going to do is we're going to say in our system call, the params, so the URL params are actually just going to be those characters. That's literally it. Okay? So we're going to make that update. Run the server again. It's listening. Okay? So tools / download YouTube. Going routes. Download YouTube / So now we're going to make the requests. Okay. Get progress. Okay, 15%. How about now? 20%. Oh, we're getting there. 26. Okay. This video's downloaded. So basically I'm acting like the front end. And this is what the loader would do, right? It would just keep requesting this. And we see that the number's going up. Numbers going up. Eventually it's going to hit 100. And when it hit 100, that means that we can download the video. So I'm just going to keep requesting. And the front end should do it periodically, right? I'm doing it on the occasion whenever I feel like it. I drink a cup of coffee, text some girl I'm talking to, then all of a sudden I want to know what the progress is of my video. Ooh, it's getting there. We're almost there, guys. I'm so excited. It's like opening presents on Christmas morning. Almost there. So it's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. It's going to hit 100. Oh, we're basically there. 100. Okay, great. So now I'm the front end. So I could actually just call, what method do I call now? If I call this get video ID, it's going to get me the video, right? So let's do get video. And boom, just download the video. So just like that, we were able to simulate the front end. We were able to define all of these backend methods, download the video using the Python utility, coordinate efforts between the database, Rails API, and now we have a video that's been downloaded. So again, this is a product that makes tons and tons of money. According to the other website, 900 million. According to this website, we have almost 2 million views a day. So something like this, you guys can build using a simple amount of code, simple understanding of servers, clients. And in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually build out that awesome front end that you guys were seeing, right? So this front end like this, and we're going to coordinate the game. We're going to coordinate how it looks. We're not going to build out the footer. But essentially this just section right here and displaying that with the loader component, and it's going to be great. So thank you so much, guys, listening to this video. You were awesome. If you guys like this video, consider giving me a like, sending me a subscribe, because it motivates me to make more videos like this. And since I'm a poor student, I don't have a lot of money, I might just stop at any point. So please give me that motivation. Give me some thumbs up. Give me some love. I'll give you guys some love back. Thanks, guys. Take care.